Iris and Ted are my mummy's cousins in Derry. Their mummy was my mummy's godmother, a fact I only found out myself about 5 years ago when the secret of my Catholic family in the Bogside came out into the open. If you've heard any of my stories before, you will know that it all started when I found a crucifix in a box in my Granda Campbell's bedroom. After that, it became a case of a do-it-yourself, who do you think you are, with a dash of cash in the attic on the side. Turns out the crucifix is very old, probably my great-grandmother's, but it's not valuable, although the family that it led us to are. In fact, they are priceless and well worth the rummaging around in the old boxes that revealed them. Iris and Ted are a brother and a sister, now in their 80s, neither of whom have married, so they have always lived together in the family home. Right now, they're pretty much locked down, only heading out to Mass and for essentials. Last week, I put together a pick-you-up box for them. Jelly babies, Nescafe sachets of caramel latte, crossword and word search books, and Gene Kelly DVDs. Nothing like a bit of singing in the rain to get you through a dreary afternoon. The last time I saw them was well over a year ago. Newly found members of my late mother's extended family, they have been able to fill me in on so much of what my Catholic grandfather John left behind and lost when he married my Protestant granny Lily. When we say Derry/Londonderry, it has a sting in it for me. It is that great big divide down the middle of the words that has meant we are only discovering our family history now. The first time I met Iris and Ted was at a family reunion in the Malvern Hotel in the centre of Derry a few years ago. My oldest sister and I had decided to go along, if rather tentatively, to meet the descendants of my grandfather's 15 brothers and sisters, many of whom had come from across the world. As we got ourselves ready in the hotel room upstairs, my sister and I wondered if we were doing the right thing. What if we don't like them? What if they're not our kind of people? What if we have nothing in common with them? The doubts were gathering at a fast pace. Still, we had come this far and we needed to follow through, so we headed downstairs to the large reception room. The first thing I noticed as we entered the double doors was a white-haired, handsome man at the back of the room. In his 60s, he looked uncannily like my mother's brother, Kenneth. I believe I slightly gasped, such was my surprise and fascination with the family resemblance. He was my mother's cousin, Tony. Round the edges of the room were large freestanding display boards with the names of each of my grandfather's brothers and sisters. Joseph, James, Patrick, Daisy, Mary Bridget, and then there were grainy photos of these long-lost aunts and uncles pinned underneath. People were milling around with drinks in their hands, reading all the information gathered about each of the individuals. The sisters who had emigrated to America, the brother who had run the local football team, the sister who had died young of TB, the grandmother who had reared them all on her own, supplementing her meagre income by raising pigs in the backyard of the house in Wellington Street. It was all hard to take in. There was my mummy's cousin Jamesy, who had played football with Georgie Best, and another cousin who had written plays and poetry that had been on the radio. We were among people we had never met before, and yet they seemed familiar. They shared many of our interests and our passions. Deirdre, who had researched and organised the whole event, came over and introduced herself. When realising we were the Armagh connection, a bit of a ripple went round the room. Everyone had been expecting us, keen to see the family of their long-lost Uncle John. We were made so welcome. It was then that we met Iris and Ted. They were warm and funny and full of chat about the old days, and Iris was able to tell me all about my great-granny, the one who reared the pigs, how she'd always tied her hair back and wore a long tie-around pinny. discovered that our granda had had a nickname, Banerjee, given to him because he had worked in a quarry named that just outside the Derry city. We found out that over the years he had often gone back to Derry to visit his brothers, and he had always kept in touch by letter. We saw pictures of them, so like our granda in the way they sat, cigarette in hand and dog at the feet. After lunch, there was a talk on family history and time for a chat, and then there was a break before the big celebration in the evening. My sister and I lay on our beds in the hotel, resting and chatting about what we had just experienced. That evening at the party, the crack was great. Dinner, photo opportunities, storytelling and songs at the front. At one point, someone played a recording of the radio story my mum's cousin had written. We all sat at our tables, listening carefully to the lovely Derry lilt of his accent as he described the bogside at the time of the 12th of July in the 1960s. The Pruddy Dicks were getting ready for their bonfire, he said. They were running around, gathering their piles of wood and making their image of the Pope to pile on the top. We were sick of the Pruddy Dicks. My sister and I looked at each other and began to snigger. We were the only Pruddy Dicks in the room. The realization of this fact hit hard on everyone else, and there was a sudden mad dash to the front of the room to turn off the cassette player. A very flustered-looking Deirdre said, "Well, this was a story of its time. Things have changed and moved on." She looked so uncomfortable, but my sister and I were just laughing at the absurdity of it all, thinking of how similar things might have been heard round our way when there were different types of marches in Armagh. The dancing went on well into the night, and when the Proclaimers song, "I Will Walk 500 Miles, played, I had a really good jive with my mum's cousin Tony. "I'm sure this is a Pruddy Dick song," I said loudly into his ear as we held hands, and he spun me round. "Nope, definitely not," he replied. "Got to be one of ours," and we laughed. All of my sisters and my brother, along with my nephew, have kept the connections of the Derry family. We have gone up to the city and shared meals together, each time learning a wee bit more about the uncles, aunts and cousins that our mother never got to know. We have visited St. Eugene's Cathedral, where she was christened in those early days when my grandparents lived in the city. When my sister in England's husband was very ill, Ted went especially to light a candle for him there, a very special and meaningful thing for my brother-in-law. Iris and Ted have visited us here in Armagh, and the crack has always been mighty. COVID has put a hold on those lunches, those catch-ups, those trips up north, but it has not, and it will not, let a family that was divided for generations be divided ever again. Thank you.
Jane, thank you so much.
Okay.
I just want to tell everybody that if you want to hear the original story about how Jane found out about this mysterious hidden family, it is on podcast 76, which you can get at our website, and it's called Secrets and Lies. And I actually wrote it up for the BBC, so it's a feature. If you put in BBC News NI and Jane Searle, it'll come up and you can read about it there. It's a fantastic story. I loved it. And the funniest part, as in funny peculiar, because Jane, I only met you through 10 by 9, of course.
That's right.
It turned out that one of those brothers had lived next door to me in Derry for years that I had been there.
Yeah. It's a small world. Northern Ireland's a wee small place, isn't it?
It is, and yet so easily divided, eh?
Yes, so easily divided.
And it is interesting because one of the daughters next door was called Iris. So when I saw that name, I thought, and that's not a very common name.
No.
The families and
wonderful. They're just wonderful, and my mother would have loved them as cousins. She would have really loved them. They're very similar. It's just sad, really, that they never knew each other because of the generation that they lived in, really. So hopefully we're moving on.